Hi, and welcome to our first Conversations with the County. I'm your County Executive, Armin Budish. Today we'll be talking about two important subjects. First is the future of transportation in Cuyahoga County, and then we'll give you tips on how to protect your parents and your grandparents from physical and financial abuse. And I'll be answering some of your questions. First up is Grace Gallucci. Grace is the president and CEO of NOACA, which stands for the Northeast Ohio Area-Wide Coordinating Agency. That's a mouthful. But here's the thing, a key part of NOACA's vision is to build a great transportation system for this region. And we know that a great transportation system is key to a great county. Grace, hello and welcome.
Hello.
This is our first one of these.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here. I appreciate being the first one.
All right, so let's get started. So, the state recently cut RTA by about $20 million a year, and that's led to RTA talking about fare hikes or service cuts. Tell me, how should RTA handle this huge loss of revenue?
Well, RTA overall does a great job in delivering public transit services, but certainly any loss in revenue, particularly in this kind of economy, is going to have a tremendous impact. At this point, they certainly need to really look overall at their system to ensure they're being most efficient and most effective in optimizing service delivery. They'll need to take a look at perhaps an operational analysis to overall restructure their system. And concurrently, though, we do need to talk about additional revenue and how we can raise funds in order to support that system.
One of the things that we already have had as an issue with transit generally, we've got now these job hubs out around the county. Jobs aren't all in one place anymore. People who live in the neighborhoods often have a lot of trouble getting to the job. And, in central neighborhood, for example, a lot of people don't have cars, just as an example. So how do we work the RTA system or the transit system in order to help people better get to those jobs?
You're absolutely correct in that jobs and people have both further dispersed from the central city and the central business district, and that has caused a mismatch between employers and employees. In order to deal with that more effectively, I think transit has to do some more work on identifying and working with these job hubs and employers as well as employees. NOACA at this time is developing a workforce mobility plan to better make those connections and better make those matches and to help both employees, employers, and the County Workforce Board be able to accept the information and use it to benefit them. I think
you think employers might be willing to contribute money, finances to some kind of system to help move people to those jobs?
I think so, but I think it would have to be correctly developed, and they would have to be approached in a way that certainly provides them the information to benefit their own organizations and to make lives of their employees better. And and I think part of what we have to do as well, though, in terms of long-term, those are more short-term solutions, is better get employers and employees to understand the relationship between land use and transportation.
Good points. I mean, the problem is you're not going to be moving those businesses closer to the employees, so you got to move the employees somehow better to the employers. So switching gears a little bit, right now RTA and most public transit systems focus primarily on buses, and we have the benefit of also having rail here. But what do you see in the future? I mean, we're going to have autonomous vehicles soon. We already have Uber and Lyft and other options. How do we create a new type of transit system that can best use the new things that are coming along?
Great question. First, not only do we have buses and trains, we also have bus rapid transit, which is a sort of hybrid between a bus and a rail. A lot of folks may not understand how that works, but it does provide opportunity for us to improve service. We currently only have, I believe, 2 corridors of BRT. We can add more corridors, and I think that would help make the system more efficient and effective. And I don't remember the question.
Uber, Lyft,
Oh, yes,
autonomous
yes.
vehicles.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you're thinking in a very visionary way and you're understanding that all of those transportation changes are really transformational. They're transformational for us as public service providers. They're transformational in the transportation sector and in the workforce. How I see it being able to influence how we deliver service is it can only help. Right now, public transit needs to be able to have a dense environment to be efficient. And typically, the most successful routes are what we call trunk routes, and they're on the major arterials. The other kinds of routes, which are feeder routes, are usually not as productive. They simply are bringing people to those trunk routes. You also have the problem of the last mile. Whether you're on the last mile of a trunk route on either end, how do you get from there to your house or to wherever you're going?
So you might have a bus take you to someplace in Solon, for example, where there's a lot of jobs, but then you might have
Right.
Uber or Lyft take you from there.
Exactly. And I also think that the Uber, the Lyft type organization, taxis, any kind of driverless vehicle, shared anything with bicycles or skates or anything that's coming out there can certainly be a last mile solution, and I think that's optimal for that. But one more is I think that those can be used as feeders as well, and so perhaps instead of having some of the transit system routes that are less productive become the feeders, or they are the feeders, maybe look at options to either contract with some of those other organizations or allow transfers between those kinds of transformational types of transportation and the traditional kind.
You're in your capacity as head of NOACA, and you're involved in all kinds of national organizations too. I assume you get to see what's going on in other cities, other regions, and what's working and maybe what's not working. Are you seeing some things in other cities that could potentially be very useful here?
I do, but first I do want to say that we are very fortunate to have a terrific foundation of a public transit system, to have, as you mentioned earlier, both the bus and the rail and now the BRT, and to have a system that has a dedicated sales tax to support it is ideal. Many communities don't have that. So what we have, they're trying to get with referendums and such, and sometimes they're successful, such as Denver, and sometimes they're not successful, such as Nashville. That being said, I think we can also learn from cities that may be similarly situated, like a Chicago, that has much of the Midwest flavor that we do, has the same kind of winters and temperature changes. And what I think Chicago has done really well that maybe we can learn from is they have done a terrific job in creating a truly multimodal transportation system. So certainly
And
the
why don't you
automobile.
explain what that means?
Sure, yeah. Multimodal means that there are many ways that you can travel to get to where you need to go. So you can travel by automobile, you can travel by bus and train and bike, or you can walk. So there's a lot of options. And they've done a great job of integrating that into the fabric of their commuting patterns and living patterns. And so whether you live in the urban area, the suburban area, or even the exurban area, there are options for you to either drive, take public transit, bike, or walk to many different job hubs within the region. And particularly, they have a terrific market share for their central business district. So the majority of people coming into downtown Chicago still take public transit. And so I think learning on how they were able to create that system, and much of that had to do with the regional transit system that was developed in 1974. They're similar to ours, but theirs included 6 counties while we only have 1. And then at the same time, they did some improvements in 1981 that really put together some additional pieces that the private sector was unable to provide in terms of commuter rail, and brought that in. So I think we can learn a lot.
So you mentioned Chicago had multiple counties involved. NOACA also works with multiple counties, unlike our regional transit system, which is Cuyahoga County.
Right.
What role do you see with NOACA in terms of our transit system here? Does NOACA already play a role, and can it be playing more of a role?
I think we already play a role in that we are the regional facilitator. We have a transit council that meets regularly every quarter, and it includes the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority, which is the Cuyahoga County's transit system, but also includes the other 4 from those counties. And we facilitate those discussions. We talk about being able to integrate some services and make things easier. That being said, we also provide funding, particularly for bus and bus replacement programs. Can we play a bigger role, you ask? I think so. And ODOT actually has entrusted us to develop a regional strategic plan looking at how we can take all 5 transit systems and operate more efficiently and effectively. So we will be kicking that off shortly to look at both the strategic implications as well as the tactical ones, and I look forward to that.
So you think there might be some coordination, some work between RTA and Lake Tran or Lorraine or some of the other counties around?
Sure. I think there's anything from being able to do more ride sharing, sharing of services, facilities. I think they already do some fare swaps, but they could probably do more. So it could be anything on that end, which really gets into the more collaboration, all the way up to and including looking at different service delivery models.
Earlier in our discussion, you mentioned that we might need more revenues. We have elections coming up very shortly. There will definitely be a new governor. There'll be new members of the legislature. Ohio has historically been terrible at funding public transit compared to, Pennsylvania and Indiana, and all our neighbors do better than we do. As a state government, what do you see as the opportunities? Do you think, look into your crystal ball, will we see more funds coming into public transit after the election?
I hope so. I think funding for transportation in general generally has been nonpartisan. And it doesn't matter your political affiliation. Infrastructure is important for the economy and quality of life. But I look forward to perhaps a different perspective, specifically on public transit and even on road and urban transportation maintenance. Right now, there's a lot of challenges on both sides, maintaining our current system of roadways, which need about $1 billion in order to bring them in a state of good repair for our 5 counties, as well as over $500 million to bring the transit systems up to a state of good repair. So there are challenges there.
And that's without expanding the public transit
That's without
system.
expanding. That's keeping everything the way it is. Now, what I hope, because as you indicated, Ohio does not fare well with supporting public transit. And really
What are the numbers? About 60-something?
63 cents per capita, where there are some neighboring states that provide 50, 60, and in some states in the U.S. over $200 per capita. I can tell you that when I lived and worked in Chicago as the deputy director of the regional transportation system, the business community was very, very strong in being able to convince the legislature, and it was a bipartisan effort in the Chicagoland area as well as even downstate, to get a referendum passed that produced an additional $500 million annually.
Wow.
So this was 2007. And obviously, Chicagoland is 4 times as large as Cleveland, so we wouldn't be looking at anything of that magnitude. But we would think that because of the importance of public transit in maintaining our economy and attracting new businesses, we have got to be able to convince the legislators and the administration that this is something we have to do.
Well, Grace, thank you so much. Your insights into this are invaluable. I'm just ending my term as president of the board of NOACA, and it's been really educational and enlightening for me working with this agency. At their annual meeting, I called for RTA to develop a strategic plan that will address some of the issues that we've discussed today. I hope to bring you news of that in coming programs. And of course, the county will support productive solutions to the challenges that we face. We'll be right back with our next guest. Thank you. Now I'd like to welcome Marlene Robinson Statler. Marlene's our interim director of the county's Department of Senior and Adult Services, which is also called DSAS. We use a lot of initials. This department is charged with protecting our parents and our grandparents. Now, I've seen it. Older adults age 60 or older can all too easily be the victims of abuse or neglect or financial exploitation. Often, it's at the hands of people they trust or depend on for their daily care. Unfortunately, a lot of times when there is abuse, no one knows or reports it. Nationally, only 1 in 10 cases of elder abuse is reported. It's impossible to protect our loved ones if we don't know about the harm that they face. So, let's bring on Marlene. Marlene, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So let's start with a simple one. What is elder abuse?
Elder abuse. So what we normally look for is we look for signs. Like normally, think about someone that if you were in a banking function, you see normally every day. So maybe that person now comes in and they're disheveled. Or maybe the person comes in now and you see a physical mark or some type of abuse on them. So that's what normally, there's different signs we look for the abuse.
Now that's physical abuse.
Correct.
So, if you see a bruise or something like that, that's not typical.
Correct.
That's
exactly.
a sign of
exactly.
abuse. But is there other types of abuse that you deal with besides just physical abuse?
Absolutely, there's emotional abuse because obviously someone has a caregiver. Normally we would see that when maybe a neighbor reports that they have less and less contact with one of their relatives or one of their neighbors, and they notice that person becoming more reserved and more isolated. So we start to look to see if there's any neglect or self-neglect. We sometimes see abuse in the form of hoarding, where someone's in their home and maybe they're hoarding items or even pets, things like that, and the neighbors or a family member or a caregiver reports that these things have changed.
But that's not really abuse, is it? If somebody is just hoarding or has gotten to a point mentally where they're not able to care for themselves and they're not being hygienic and the house is becoming dangerous, is that abuse or is
It's actually considered neglect, and we look at that because we are mandated to look at cases of abuse, neglect, self-neglect, and financial exploitation.
You mentioned somebody's becoming more isolated or not seeing their friends any longer.
Right.
Is that abuse? Because do you see, for example, family members that are keeping their loved one from those social contacts for whatever ulterior motives they might have?
Unfortunately, yes. We do see incidents where, say for instance, there's several siblings in a family, and maybe that parent is with one of those siblings, but then the other siblings are refrained from being able to make visits. And more they're being isolated, or they're not able to make contact with people. They're not doing their normal routines as far as going to a senior center or going out of the home.
So in a case like the siblings that you
Yes,
mentioned, for
yes.
example, where one might be staying at home.
Correct.
I've seen situations, in my
Yes.
prior life where the motive might be, I want to make sure that mom, that the other kids don't see that I'm taking money from mom, for example, or I'm living off of mom, or whatever it might be. Is that still part of elder abuse?
Yes, unfortunately it is. And that's a financial exploitation. Unfortunately, what we normally see, there's usually more than one incidence in the home. So there may be financial exploitation, but there also may be neglect, where someone is taking advantage of the adult financially and utilizing whatever benefits they're receiving, but also neglecting but not providing them the proper care.
How often does
physical, emotional, or financial abuse occur?
Unfortunately, right now, 1 out of 9 cases are reported. So think about all the other cases that are not reported. About 43% of abuse is not reported. In Cuyahoga County, we have one of the highest incidents of abuse. So for instance, last year, we had approximately 4,000 cases of abuse or allegations that were made. 2,000 of those were substantiated.
Are
So
those
50%.
are most of those with older people?
Yes, yes, age over 60 and over, yes.
60, and well, I don't consider 60 so
Well.
old. But, where do we go if we believe that somebody is being abused, either any of these different ways? Is there a telephone number to call? Is there a place to go? How do we step in and help?
Absolutely. We have what's called One Call for Wellness. And so the one call would be area code 216-420-6700. That's our main line for contact. We also have a website because you can make an online referral also 24 hours a day. And that would be www.dsas.cuyahogacounty.us. So you can do
That's a
one of
long
two
one.
ways.
Let's
Exactly.
go back
So-
to the phone.
Okay, all right.
216-420.
6700.
6700.
Right, and there's one call that will allow them to actually link someone in to our Adult Protective Services Department or any of the other services that Senior Adult Services offers.
And then what happens after I call? Where does the phone call go to? What happens?
Okay, so normally our process, when the allegation is made, because again, this is an allegation, nothing's been substantiated at that point in time. When the allegation is made, that case is then given in a round-robin process to one of our social workers. They then initiate an interview process and make contact with the family in order to go out to do an interview and to investigate this allegation. Now, depending on the situation, we have 24-hour referrals if there's an emergency, and we have then a 48-hour timeline that we're mandated by the state to complete, at least making the efforts to attempt to investigate this.
So when you say there's a telephone number to call, for
Yes.
example, can you do that anonymously, or do you have to leave your name?
Well, the information that's over the phone, that would be anonymous. Now, if you're doing a referral online, that's confidential because it does, obviously, we have a email address that links you. But if you're doing the number over the phone, yes, you can be anonymous.
There are certain people under state law that are required to
Yes.
make a report
Yes.
if they believe that there might be abuse going on. Who are those people? And I know the law just changed, so more people were added to that list.
Yes, yes. And in a good way, we're actually happy that as of September 29th, the law changed to include additional people that make reports. So customarily, you would think the social workers make reports if they're
Like a
servicing some
caregiver.
caregiver or something like that, or someone goes to the hospital and they're involved with the social work. What happened on September 29th, though, that list has become more robust. So things that you might have thought were already mandated reporters, like you might think of financial institutions, that would be banks, financial planners, CPAs, would be making those reports. Some of them were, so I do want to impress that some were making reports. Now they're mandated by law to report to us if there's any allegations of abuse. So normally our constituents over 60, they're still doing some banking in person, not necessarily online.
So you got financial people, nurses, social workers, doctors.
EMTs, ambulance drivers, pharmacists, that's something new because it also, including, think about the opioid crisis. So
Right.
now the pharmacist normally, because again, you're interacting with someone, you may see someone come in one month, the next month you notice they come in, has either a visible mark or they're more disheveled or there's something just changed because you have a rapport with that person, you develop a rapport because they're doing the functions more so in person.
And after the call comes in from whoever, at that point, your office will do whatever research or investigation is called for.
Correct.
Including
Correct.
going out there and seeing
Exactly.
the person
Exactly. Absolutely.
who's
Absolutely.
alleged to be abused.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if you find abuse, what can you do?
Well, we do make some referrals, and depending on the situation, sometimes if we have to look at safety for that adult, it may be looking at relocating that person, or possibly looking at assistance if they have to be placed in an assisted living or something like that, and looking at what we can do to make sure that person's safe. You know,
Safety's the key.
Exactly, exactly. Sometimes we have to make referrals also to our mobile crisis, depending on the situation. Sometimes if someone's suicidal or something like that, we have to make sure we do our due diligence that they're safe.
Thank you, Marlene. Great information, and it's so important.
Yes.
You know, our loved ones, our parents and grandparents and spouses, if we don't look out for them, who will?
Exactly. It's, it's not a legal obligation now, it's a moral obligation for us.
So this is a tough subject, but it's important information. We all need to be looking out for the safety of our family, our friends, our neighbors who could be in danger. That's it for now. Please follow us on social media so you can find our next installment of Conversations with the County. Until next time, have a good week.